Hello, hello. It's Ken Lane, API Evangelist here for another one of my API Evangelist conversations where I just sit down with folks who are doing interesting things with APIs. Let's not waste any time. Let's dive in, see who we have here today. Hello, who are you?
Hello, Ken. My name is Frank Kilcommins, and I am also an API evangelist with a company called SmartBear. Do a lot of work across OpenAPI Initiative and Good, Bad, or Indifferent. Have been working quite a bit with the Arazzo specification.
Yes, yes. Big fan of your work. We've been friends for a long time. You're doing amazing work. What's Arazzo? Tell everyone.
Well, Arazzo is it's the brainchild of the OpenAPI Initiative. So, quick history lesson: a few years ago, I don't know if we got bored because of the pandemic or whatnot, but we tried to tackle some bigger challenges that were happening across the API landscape under the API umbrella. So we created working groups. You were heavily involved kind of in the formation of all of those, Ken. And one of the topic areas that really piqued my interest was the concept of, well, how can we describe API workflows on top of modern API, let's say technology, in a way that will alleviate a lot of the pain that we felt as practitioners. And Arazzo was the result or the birthing of that process into a specification that also went to a certain degree a long way to maturing the OpenAPI initiative to a multi-specification project. And so Razzo is all about describing API workflows. So I think we've all been in the scenario where we've been onboarded to an API. We've gotten that reference documentation or that OpenAPI description, but 200 endpoints long. And you're like, well, that's cool. But actually, what I want to do is A, B, C, and D. And how can I achieve that? I'm kind of blinded by the verbosity of this thing. In other situations, what we want to achieve might span across multiple open API descriptions. And again, that's where the process breaks down from a kind of community or open standards perspective, because we had no way to kind of chain what to do across multiple of those types of artifacts without some human manual work. And if you did really well, you would describe that in your developer portal in a format like, HTML, and having the pages there to guide folks through the process. If you did it not quite as well, then maybe out of band, you would be sharing things like PowerPoint docs, Google Slides, PNGs, GIFs, videos, whatever the case may be, which is all great. It's all trying to make the life easier from a consumer. But ultimately, once you put the investment into crafting those things, they have this nasty habit of getting stale and out of sync very, very quickly. So um, they were some of the primary use cases that we focused on from Arazzo, as well as better testability, um, revamping kind of the SDK and code generation ecosystem. Because again, if you have that really big open API description, or you have, very modular open API descriptions, again, the code that gets automatically generated from those things can be hard to deal with. But if you generate code specifically for the use case that you're interested in, it keeps you on piece, and it ultimately makes your life a lot easier. And then the elephant that came into the room throughout the whole process, of course, was AI. And okay, now we have AI as an API consumer. How is this all going to work, especially if we haven't been doing our jobs so well from an API documentation perspective? And Erasmus seems to be coming out right at the right time, where it's kind of adding the required levels of determinism to give us confidence in offloading the responsibility of API consumption to these agents who are going to perform, critical activities on our behalf.
Yeah, yeah. So lots to unpack there. Let's see,
Yeah.
where do we want to start? So, I mean, first of all, thank you for all your work. Thank you for all your service. I know how hard it is to move forward to spec, but I also know how hard it is to move forward to spec in the Open API initiative. And uh, I salute you, sir, for pushing it forward and getting it out the door. And I would say it thawed. I mean, because overlays came out right after, so I felt like it really thawed the room, changed the tone. But those are more the politics of all of this. Let's get into the kind of the realities, the technical bits is, with OpenAPI, I see OpenAPI as our digital resources. These are our nouns. As you said, we've got long lists of our digital resources, but your you're talking about how do how do you stitch those together into meaningful capabilities and experiences? And my experience with API and formerly known as Swagger is most people do not see and care about the spec. Most people still after 15 years see Swagger UI as the reason you do it. And which may or may not be true. We could argue about that, but is what you mentioned AI, but what are people gonna actually care about, and what sort of tooling adoption and other things you're seeing to enable that?
Yes, again, and I think that's the way everything is even maybe accelerating now is people are going to get less caught up in the actual semantic formats that are under the hood of these things. They just want better experiences and capabilities to enable them get their job done as a practitioner or as a product manager or whatever the case may be. So it's very exciting to see the emergence of new tooling because while I do love specifications, a specification that is not supported or implemented by any tooling is not so accessible for folks. So it's really encouraging to see the tooling that's coming about. I see different vendors focusing on the kind of consumer experience. So thinking about things like recipes, things like guided walkthroughs when it comes to the API documentation. So again, folks don't have to get stuck in the weeds of an open API description. They can focus on kind of going through step by step. What are the tasks that we need to achieve this overall job to be done? So really kind of guiding people very carefully through that process and having an ability to be able to kind of keep that documentation up to date on the fly as the underlying components may change. And there's a lot of interest in the testing side of the house. And I think that's where we've done poorly across the industry in general is giving folks the robust and easy to use tooling to make sure that what they're doing actually, validates what's on the tin. So are they doing what they promised? And also are they able to manage drift over time, which is a big challenge. So if you think about Arazzo giving you a way to proclaim your promises and your capabilities to the world, it gives the tooling and the machines under the hood a way to validate that you can keep and honor that promise as the underlying APIs change themselves. So I also see it kind of doubling up as a end-to-end or functional testing specification in the minds of many. And I think that will be kind of an area that we'll be advocating for quite a bit as well. And I also alluded to it in my big spiel to open, but the SDK side of the house and code generation side of the house is very interesting. And there's a good few vendors focusing there as well. And then we have the supporting tools around that, like linting, like validation, like just being able to parse and ensure that these things are correct, which is exciting. And I even see industry bodies becoming interested in it, which again is a good sign that they see this as I don't know whether they're looking at it as a piece of chocolate, a carrot or a stick, but it's something that they can use to make sure that the providers that are within their industry vertical are doing things in a consistent manner.
Chocolate covered stick
Yeah.
is what I like. Um, so, I mentioned, and you just alluded, kind of went through it, is we've been managing our digital resources using RESTful interfaces or HTTP interfaces for about 25 years now. And we've been organizing those. And what Razzo does is allows us to start expressing those as more meaningful capabilities, stitching them together with others and build these. But a lot of the tools you mentioned, creating guidelines, testing, quality, like this all goes into taking those capabilities and turning them into experiences. So you can actually a normal human being that isn't wanting to go through, the stages of hell to like make something happen. They can just walk through this guide that speaks to their business use case and use this. But you mentioned a couple other things in there with trust and others. Like my API resources is a sprawling, chaotic landscape. And I appreciate you building a workflow for me to kind of organize those into meaningful workflows. But am I going to be able to govern this too?
Well, that's the goal. I think, let's say this the semantics that are contained within something like this and the format itself aids itself to allowing tooling to help us govern these things. So, it follows a lot of the same principles as OpenAPI and Async API with regards to some of the metadata objects that are there that you can enrich and make it, more, uh, um, let's say, better able to classify by tooling. So I can imagine that you will have things like portfolios of capabilities rather than portfolios of distinct APIs. So it's more like you can search and you can discover the capability that you need to solve the problem that you have. And then from there, you can see potentially what API providers are offering these things underneath the hood. And, that will expose a whole other dimension of things that you might care about, the SLAs that are offered by those underlying providers, et cetera. So it gives you this ability to kind of attack the problem from maybe a higher plane, and one that is a little bit more intuitive to think about as we're trying to solve problems in a human context. There's a thread that I haven't pulled on too hard yet, but I think we also do a bad job at expressing what we want from software. And then we can only really fully articulate that back to the provider when we see something. And for me, I think there's something in Arazzo which, combined with maybe practices from behavioral driven development, that can give us something to move more confidently from the requirements that we are setting forth into the actual software that's built to honor those requirements. But it's a thread I haven't pulled on too hard yet. But for me, there's something interesting down that rabbit hole.
Yeah, and you use some of the language I hear a lot of in the space. I see it as more API discovery and semantics and other things because I'm very spec and API focused, but AI and AI agents and you got to be able to discover these things. You got to be able to understand the purpose and the meaning and that intent and that context. You mentioned context, like there's, and so I've I've been going through the 3.2 Open API spec and seeing what's cooking over there. I'm watching it. The tagging's getting a little bit better, a little bit more structured. Do you feel like we're gonna get more of that kind of I don't know, I'm hopeful of like domain driven design in motion as part of workflows, as part of, with semantic layer and all of this. Do you see Arazzo and Open API working together like that?
Yeah, that's the plan. Like, nothing is happening in a vacuum, and that's kind of one of the benefits of it being a specification under the broader OpenAPI Initiative umbrella. So, advancements that we make with regards to referencing across all of these different types of artifacts, having some kind of continuity of principle with regards to how we tackle some of the bigger problems, we'll then start kind of sharing those and implementing those hopefully consistently across all specifications. One of the exciting things that we'll be working on soon, as part of kind of the core working group, is also adding support for async API within Arazzo. So, it's very practical that you will have a workflow or a use case that will span request response type of interfaces as well as event driven types of interfaces. So being able to describe that as part of this overarching workflow or recipe is something that will be possible in the not too distant future.
I'm very I would say the event driven, which async I think is a nod to, but I think also 3.1, OpenAPI 3.1 changes that really don't get a lot of attention. I think there's a lot of opportunity and with the 3.2 and Arazzo, and we haven't even touched on overlays. But for folks, I mean, I know back to pushing this forward as part of the OAI. You've done a lot of work. Thank you for all this work. It's I would say not just for the Razzle spec, but what I said about overlays, but also providing more, I think, renewed energy for the OAI. How can people get involved, give feedback? If tooling makers wanna jump on, how where do you need help?
Yeah, so we're welcoming of help across the board. So what I would say is go to the Open API's website. So that's openapis.org. And what you will find there is you'll find a way to join the Slack community, which is an open community. You'll also find where all of the GitHub repositories are. So any form of entry into that ecosystem is welcome. And one of the things that we will be doing is updating the tooling site, having a listing of all of the emerging tooling that is coming from an Arazzo perspective. And we'll be looking to showcase some of the vendors that are building tooling there underneath the Open API outreach committee as well. So we are eager to kind of showcase the work that folks are doing in kind of driving adoption of the specifications forward. And it's something that we're hoping to get much more engaged in as a community.
Good stuff. Thank you. That reminds me, I got to harass Chris Wood come talk about OpenAPI, the tooling section, and another thing that I set in motion and then left and didn't. He carried it forward, so I'm very thankful. Um, but
I think it's even an ask, something that you can even do, Ken, is when we think about, the nice format of APIs.json, I think even being within that, being able to kind of reference and list your workflows is also something that we can explore. And I think that will be another interesting way for folks to be able to catalog and remain in control of their broader ecosystem of concerns.
appreciate that nod and JSON schema as well. In there, we did a lot of good JSON schema goodness across all of these projects. Um, it's a good world. Thank you for your work. I appreciate you coming by, Frank.
My pleasure, Ken.
All right. Yeah, get involved. I can't articulate how important it is for everyone to jump on and lend in a hand. There's waves and cycles of Open API Initiative, and then now we got multiple specs. There's working groups. Go get involved. And it's good stuff. I got to get more fluent with Arazzo, and then you'll be hearing more storytelling from me. All right. Thanks everyone for coming by.